All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking today. It is the Wednesday after Election Day, and it was a good day. It was a good night. I was actually very pleased when I went to sleep. I told you yesterday when I was talking to Arlen, I thought that perhaps the most important election, from at least a national standpoint, was the Prop 50 race in California, and that won decisively by a very significant mark, 27 points. I think 27 points, huge. It really was a complete repudiation of Trump is what it was. It was a decision by the California voters that we are going to redistrict. We understand it's not perfect. We don't love the fact that we're going to gerrymander our state so that we have almost all Democratic or many more Democratic congressional districts even than we have now, maybe 5 more. But we've got to fight fire with fire. And obviously, there's tremendous anger in California at Trump for the ICE raids in Los Angeles and around the state. Trump did very well among Latino voters in 24, much better than many thought he would do. And it's understandable why. But he is completely blown. I think that Prop 50 race tells you. And I saw lines. I was watching CNN late last night, and they went down to Santa Ana and showed a voting precinct there where the lines were just out way out the door into the street. And the faces, as far as I could tell, they were not white faces. There were Latino faces. There were Asian faces. And this tells me that Trump's xenophobic, immigrant bashing policies have really come home to hurt him, at least in California. And it could well result. I'm not saying this will happen. We don't know. But if you look at the numbers in the elections across the country yesterday, looks like there's going to be an anti-Trump. And I'm not even saying anti-Republican wave, although there certainly will be an anti-Republican wave as well. But that is very plausible. That would strike me as the most likely outcome today. What will happen next year is that there's going to be just a surge against Trump at the ballot box. Now, will that mean that Democrats will seize Congress, or at least the House? We can hope. And it's not because I love the Democrats. You know I don't. I have such contempt for so many Democratic lawmakers. I was thinking about yesterday when I was talking to Arlen about why I was so irritated by Tom Hartman's piece where he attacks Trump voters. And I'm more comfortable attacking Democratic voters. I'm more comfortable attacking Kamala Harris voters, mainly because, and perhaps this is just because I know them. And they're privileged. The people I know are privileged. And I hear so often from them such contempt for Trump voters, who I think many of them, some I've talked to, they're not privileged. Some are, of course. The billionaires are. The Bill Ackmans are. The Elon Musks are. I mean, beyond any reasonable measure of what anyone should have, they have. But there are so many Trump voters who are just trying to make good, just trying to survive. And they feel betrayed, and understandably so, by both parties. Trump said he was going to take on the elites. He's basically turned government over to them. There are different kinds of elites, too. You know, there's educational, there's academic elites who have some power, some influence, certainly are better off than most Americans. But compared to the financial elites, the corporate titans, they're nothing. But they still have something. And those people, you know, people with the PhDs who have the nice jobs, maybe the lawyers, but not the corporate, corner office law firm types, but people with decent law jobs. Maybe they're government lawyers or they work in a small firm. They're self-employed. These have a pretty good life. They're not rich by what most people would consider rich, but they live pretty well. They live better than most. And they look down, many of those people, and I know them, look down on poor, struggling, and working people, especially if they vote for Trump. They don't recognize how much better their lives are than the people that they're looking down upon. All they can think about is, well, I still have to struggle. And yes, paying the tuition at the the Ivy League school that my kid got into is a hardship. Yeah. Well, that's why you should support, tuition-free public colleges and universities. That's why you should be supporting much higher top marginal tax rates. So there isn't such a great disadvantage if your kid doesn't attend, an elite private school. That's why I get so angry at those, quote, elites, unquote. Even if they're not super rich, they vote in ways that I think are counterproductive, hurt themselves, and they don't have to. And they look down on people who really are struggling. So I have huge problems with that. Or the Jews who have embraced this cult of victimhood, no matter how wealthy they have it, no matter how good they have it, no matter how much they have, they can't help but see themselves, or certainly present themselves, as victims. I can't stand that. You're not a victim. You're incredibly lucky. You're incredibly fortunate. Stop saying when you have millions in the bank that you're a victim just because, yes, some ancestors or people that, had the same last name as you were put in the ovens. That was awful. That was a terrible, terrible crime. No argument. But that doesn't mean you are a victim. I can't stand that stuff. And that's why I often find myself much more angry at the Democratic voter, the Hillary voter, the Kamala voter, than I do even at the Trump voter. Even if in some ways, I think, look, would our country be less bad off if Kamala Harris had won? I think maybe, probably because she wouldn't have had a Congress that would have given her what this Congress and the Supreme Court has given Trump. And I don't think she would have quite engaged in such an autocratic presidency. Now, if you said to me, would we be better off in if Hillary had won in 2016 versus Trump, there I'm not so sure. Trump got some Supreme Court justices, so that was a problem. Though they weren't the worst justices. Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Coney Barrett are not the worst. Hillary might not have gotten us out of Afghanistan. Hillary might well have started a war with Russia. Hillary might have passed or pushed for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So I think that decision between Trump and Hillary is very, very unclear which one would have been a worse president. I think when you look at what Trump's done since last year, since he took office, he's worse probably than Harris would have been. Although, again, you look at Ukraine, would we be in a full-blown war with Russia at this point if Harris was president? What would have happened with Israel? We don't know. So, yeah, there's your thumbnail. And I kind of, was looking at the New York Times a lot yesterday because of the race in New York. Now, other races, I get it. And the Democrats did well across the board. I'm hoping that this augurs, this foreshadows a better Democratic Party, one that actually is going to center poor, struggling, working people. I heard some comments by Hakeem Jeffries yesterday on CNN in response to Mamdani's win that kind of made me think maybe he's kind of sort of got it, but it's hard to believe, right? I mean, this guy has been such a complete functionary, such a mouthpiece for the billionaires, for the New York financial class. But hey, apparently his district in Brooklyn went overwhelmingly for Mamdani, and maybe he's like feeling his oats a little bit. Maybe he's willing to break a tiny bit with the billionaires. Well, we can only hope. I use the old Wordle, if you ever play Wordle on NYT, I use those blocks. That's what that's supposed to reminisce. And, you see there Sliwa and Cuomo are X'd out, Mamdani, and then the few, if you get solve the Wordle on the last guess, you got, I think, 6 guesses. If you get the Wordle on the 6th guess, they say few. So yeah, few. Thank God Mamdani won, because I couldn't have taken it if he had lost. I'll tell you what, it was a good thing. It was a clean sweep, especially again the two that cared. Well, they were all important. I didn't want Winsome Earl Sears. I didn't want the evangelical to win in Virginia. I didn't want Schiaparelli, the Trump MAGA candidate, to win in New Jersey. I'm glad Jay Jones won despite the tweet. Well, won by like 4 points. Was it 6 points? Was actually a surprisingly easy win for Jay Jones, despite saying he had bullets for the Republican Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates. There's pretty strong language that he used in those tweets, pretty provocative. And the fact is, the Virginia voters said, we don't care. Look, we just like the California voters who just repudiated Trumpism. That's what you saw in Virginia last night as well. So if the Democratic Party is on your side, and that the jury is very out for me on that, certainly the failure, we look at Jeffries and he did the bare minimum, but he did it. He did the bare minimum in ultimately quasi-endorsing Mamdani. And then last night on CNN saying, hey, it's our job now to make sure he has a successful mayoralty. I was sort of pleased by what Jeffries had to say. So, okay, Jeffries gets a C for that. Schumer's obviously an F-, walking out of a press conference when asked for whom he's going to vote. Look, the Zionists are really, really, I think one difference between Jeffries and Schumer is Jeffries is a Zio-Nazi because he's bought and paid for by AIPAC. Schumer really apparently believes it. And Schumer's Jewish, so I guess he was raised in that Brooklyn Jewish milieu and kind of a more liberal milieu, as I understand. Went to Harvard. He was not an Orthodox by any means, but there's a Zionist flavor that is felt in New York City, and it's been there for 75, 80 years. So I think that is in Schumer, the septuagenarian's pores. And the younger New York Jews don't feel that. That said, I was very disappointed. Over 60% of the Jewish vote in New York City went for Cuomo. And the polling had showed it was pretty close, 38, 43, 37, 46, something like that. It's really, really disturbing that so many, again, of a very privileged class of people. Now, not all Jews in New York are rich, and certainly many of those Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox and Hasids are not. They're not. But there's a lot of, if not Bill Ackman money, there's a lot of people who are, and they're tens of millions and they're millions in New York City. And a lot of them voted for these very privileged people. And they're so terrified they might lose a little tiny bit. Their taxes might go up a little bit. Or, oh my God, what if something happens to Israel? And that fear it's a paranoia. It's irrational. And it's incredibly self-centered and selfish. And it bothers me. It's tribal. It's millions of years of human evolution and tribalism. It's terrible. All right, 240-242-5646. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your reaction. Were you watching like I always am on every election night, totally I don't want to say just locked into CNN? I would yell at my son when he would try to turn on basketball. No, we're not watching basketball. Was that your reaction, or were you like, whatever? No big deal. I do say sometimes good does triumph over evil. That's what we call this program. Let's hope so. Let's hope it's good. The evil, clearly Cuomo, clearly representing evil. Will Zoran really govern good in a good manner? We can only hope. The stakes are so high. Now I get it. This is a city. This is a domestic city. It's the most important city, perhaps in the world. Another question: is New York the most important city? You can answer that question. We want to answer it. Is New York the most important city in the world? My son said absolutely. The only thing that could compare maybe London, and I kind of think Washington D.C. I mean, as powerful as Wall Street is, as powerful as those international lawyers who mostly more likely live in New York than anywhere else or practice in New York. Look, the U.S. president wields more power than anybody else. So I'm kind of going to say it's D.C. But New York's obviously incredibly important. No other city comes close. London obviously doesn't. I get it. London is the financial center of the continent. but they're not as important. It's not as important. England, UK is not as important as the United States. Not even close. Not even in the same ballpark. You want to talk about Tokyo, Beijing? No. It's New York and DC are 1-2. All right, Israeli air attack, shelling, and demolition campaign hit southern Gaza. So they continue. Israel. This is from today's Al Jazeera, just earlier this morning. Israel continues its genocidal campaign despite the quote ceasefire unquote. And I highlighted there at the bottom, Israel plans to build 356 new settlement units. So their ethnic cleansing, their Lebensraum policy, their Greater Israel Project continues. And I'm going to just show that image one more time. So look at this visual of Gaza City. It's just an absolute destroyed, completely razed to the ground. And I was thinking about that image when I was watching some World War II movies, both documentary and also just movies, and saying, what the Allies did to Germany, what Germany did. To me, that looks like Stalingrad. You see the pictures of what the German army did, the Wehrmacht did to Stalingrad in December 42 and into 43. They just, razed it to the ground. And that's what Israel did. You don't see that kind of damage otherwise, even in World War II, even with all the Allied bombings, the night raids, by Britain, the daylight pinpoint raids by the U.S. We didn't destroy cities nearly to the degree that Israel has. Got some numbers. You have this from Al Jazeera, so I'll just show I haven't been doing the slide, the slide where I put the numbers there, the little square, but I just decided to do it again because we're just seeing, carnage continue, and it was kind of arbitrary. I stopped doing it. Since October 7th, Israel and the U.S. now have killed, this is Al Jazeera number, 68,675 Gazans, and that's an additional 1,481 since ceasefire was declared a little less than a month ago on October 10th. And that means if you do the numbers, somewhere around 50, 60 dead a day. Now, I'm not sure if that's accurate because some of those 1481 were bodies discovered in the rubble. So we are seeing a per day reduction in Israel's killing spree. But it hasn't ended. The murdering, the destruction, the genocide hasn't ended. And we see there Trump and Netanyahu approaching 16,000 Gazans killed. And this, of course, does include all, those additional settlements on the West Bank, the cutting it up, the making life more and more difficult, attacks on West Bank Palestinians continue. It's just horrific. It's awful. And again, I understand that we have a full-blown genocide as well, or what's being called a genocide. I'm not sure it's quite the same in Sudan. I haven't followed it to the same degree. Those of you who say, well, you center Israel over Sudan, I do plead guilty to that. As a Jew, my concerns are heightened by what Israel is doing. The Jewish state bothers me more. Also, it's my country, the United States, that's complicit in this crime. So I do focus on that more than I do Sudan. Not that we're innocent of what's happening in Africa, but we're even more guilty in Israel. So again, let's just look at that picture one more time. I want to draw a comparison. We're going to I promise you, we'll talk about the elections. Again, I'd love to talk to you about those or anything else you want to discuss. 240-242-5646. You do see that image there. And I just wanted to highlight that one more time because I've got a little footage I got from a WW2 video channel on YouTube, and they say documentary. So let me show it. I think the channel is called Battle Guide. Now, I never heard of that Battle Guide. I'm sure they've got, hundreds of thousands of subscribers. So obviously it's a relatively popular channel, but they're just, as far as I can tell, just put in a clip there of tanks in Germany, Cologne, Germany. So let's play that real quick so you can compare. And remember that image I showed you of Gaza City where there's nothing, really nothing standing, just shells of buildings. And I was thinking about that when I saw this, because look at the tank. So you see the tank there, and it's about to start moving. So there you go. So that building, there's a lot of rubble. There's a lot of destruction, but that building is still standing, right? Even after 4 years. Cologne was the city that the Brits and the Americans targeted more than any other. Now, obviously, it wasn't the same as Dresden, where you had the firebombing there, where it was just one night or 2 nights of just incessant, high-powered, high-potency, heavy bombs that were dropped on Dresden. Cologne was just day after day, night after night, from 42, 43 on. And that's because, among other things, it was an industrial city, and it was the closest, I believe, the closest population center in Germany to the airfields in Great Britain. So Cologne got it more than any other German city. At least it got hit more frequently. I'm not sure that it sustained as much damage as a few other cities. But you can see, as bad as it is, it's not as bad as what Israel has done to Gaza City. See, so those buildings are still standing. Despite all the... Now, there's the very, very famous, beautiful black cathedral. And you can see most of the city, it looks like, bombed out, but they're still standing. Some of those buildings are still standing. A number of them are. The cathedral did not ever... Now, I don't believe the bombers actually tried to destroy the cathedral completely the way they did Monte Cassino in Italy, but it's a solid granite. It'd be really hard to bring that thing down. And there you go. So there's your video, and you can just see as bad. That just tells you that's your comp. A total war that lasted 6 years, including basically nonstop bombing of Germany from 43, 44, and into 45. And the city getting it the most, Cologne, not as badly destroyed as what Israel did to Gaza City. And the Germans were fighting back. I mean, we were attacking an enemy that had a powerful army, powerful air force, powerful navy, had committed terrible crimes. There was real justification, ongoing crimes during the war, unlike completely what Israel did to Hamas, what Israel's done to Palestine. One crime by one day of criminal activity by Hamas that was by an oppressed group against its oppressor, Israel the oppressor, completely unjustifying. No justification for what Israel did. Far more cruel, far more immoral, far more wrong than what the Allies did during World War II. All right, 240, and again, the better comp to Israel is Nazi Germany. 240-242-5646 if you want to join me. I do have the video. I do have the audio for the sound for the phone. So if you're concerned about getting through, you will, or you should. I mean, I can't promise anything. Google could go wrong. Let's look at those numbers. Interesting. Now, I saw at the very release, when the first dump came in just after 9 p.m. in New York City, we already knew that the Virginia race had gone really well. If you wanted Trump, basically, I wanted Trump to lose, right? I wanted the autocrat to go down. And he did. It was a really, Spanberger had already been called, and Jay Jones was doing much better than expected. I think Decision Desk HQ, which is Chris Cillizza's group, had also called Jay Jones the winner, but they hadn't yet called. And they had clearly called Spanberger. So it was looking pretty good. There was a double-digit lead in New Jersey. That was a race where there was thought Citarelli might pull it out. There had been a 1-point spread. I think the Atlas poll had Mikey Sherrill at 50 and Citarelli at 48. So who's going to win? I thought Sherrill would win. She was over 50% in number of polls, but who knew? So here's the final number. Well, it's not the final. This is with 90% of the estimated vote count, so 9% still to come. I'm hoping Mamdani will see his percentage inch up a few, maybe to 51%. That would be significant. I'm not sure it will happen. I was hoping he would win by 10 points. But what was most important, if you were a Mamdani supporter, besides just that he wins, I mean, obviously that's the most important thing is, I mean, if he wins 43-42, that's so much better than if he loses 42-43. So he won. So that's the most important thing. The next most important thing from my perspective, and I think from most progressives and the perspective of most progressives and most Mamdani supporters, is that he be over 50%, right? Because if he didn't best 50%, you would never stop hearing from Trump, from Cuomo supporters, from the billionaire class, from the Bill Ackmans, that the New York voters rejected Zoran, that they definitely would have voted for Andrew Cuomo to be their mayor. He was their first choice. Of more New Yorkers, it's just that Sliwa was a spoiler. That's what you would have heard. And you actually hear that now. I couldn't believe it. I saw this video, some guy using, calling Sliwa POS. They're terrified. The billionaires and the multimillionaires in New York, they are so upset. They're waxing wroth. And I love it. I love how upset the most privileged people in the world are right now. That does bring me a little bit of schadenfreude. But they're still claiming, oh, it's all Sliwa's fault. And you can't make that claim. Mamdani got more than half the votes. Even if every single Sliwa vote had gone to Cuomo, Mamdani still would have won. He would have won, let me looking at this, 48.7 for Cuomo. If every vote of Sliwa's went to Cuomo, 48.7, Mamdani at 50.4. So still he would have won by close to 2 percentage points, well above, any narrow margin that might trigger a recount. But it didn't matter. Mamdani got more than 50%. And I will tell you, those Sliwa voters, they weren't going to vote for Cuomo. Trump told them to vote for Cuomo. They weren't going to vote for it. They were going to vote for it. If they were okay with Cuomo, they would have voted for Cuomo. They voted for Sliwa because they can't stand Cuomo. They don't like Mamdani, clearly. They can't stand Cuomo. That's why they voted for Sliwa. They weren't just going to turn on a dime. Many of them were probably of the mindset, hey, I don't care between those two, Cuomo and the Dem and the socialist, the commie, as he was called. Those are, I think, your working class, many of the Staten Island voters, the working class New Yorkers who are Republican, culturally more conservative, maybe somewhat economically progressive. They're not going to vote for Cuomo. They're not going to vote for the guy who was smacking fannies and killing grannies. They just ain't going to do it. So the idea that Cuomo ever would have gotten all of Sliwa's votes is absurd. But even if he had, Cuomo still would have gone down to defeat. And that's wonderful. Now, here's a post I thought was very, very interesting because the average margin predicted for Mamdani's win, Cuomo's loss, in the pollsters was double digits, right? It was generally around 13, 14, 15%. The Atlas poll was much closer. That's what got us all nervous. Atlas had a poll, 4.5% on Monday morning it was released. That's really close, right? Mamdani's only won by 4.5%. Worrisome, right? And in the end, he won by, I think, north of, was it 6-7%? I better go put that back up for a second. I'm going to just go look real quick. So 50.4, 41.6. Let's look at that. There you go. 50.4 versus 41.6. So in the end, and it could inch up. He's up 8.8. So basically 9% margin. And what the Cuomo supporters, the diehards, the Mamdani haters, the Islamophobes, call them whatever you want. I don't like to call people bigots because they don't vote the way I like. But I think in this case, it's fair. He was really, really smeared with a lot of Islamophobia and people invoking 9/11 to say, oh, New York got hit 24 years ago on 9/11, and now we're electing a Muslim, as though there's some sort of collective guilt, as though somehow Zoran Mamdani is responsible for the terrorists who attacked the World Trade Center rather than the American the American imperialists. I mean, it's absurd. And obviously the people who were the architects of 9/11. I mean, blame Mamdani is absurd. It's idiotic. So many Christians commit crimes, so many Jews commit crimes. You're somehow going to say, well, this guy, this Muslim is responsible for what happened on October 11th. That's pure bigotry. That's hate. And that's what we saw in much of the anti-Mamdani, pro-Cuomo campaigning. Here's what Estevel has to say. They're literally blaming Mamdani for not performing as the polls said. So the polls were right, but Mamdani was wrong for not having the numbers that the polls had. I don't really understand that, but I guess what they're saying is he underperformed. Yeah, he underperformed against the polls is what Political Polls is saying. Missing the polling average was 6%. Well, actually, he was at 8.8%, but I guess what that means is that there was a prediction. The consensus came out to be about 15-point win for Mamdani. So I thought a lot about that. And I reject that. I don't think, and this is what we heard a lot, that somehow Mamdani underperformed, that people who said they were going to vote for him didn't necessarily do that his support was weakening, that the polls, his high water mark was before the election. He was already starting to drop. If there had been another week, Cuomo could have won, blah, blah, blah. That's the cope, right? That's the corporatist, corporadam Republican cope, the Trump cope, not the Curtis Sliwa cope, but the Trump cope, the MAGA cope, the Mamdani haters cope. He didn't really do that well. So I looked at those polls, and if you look on the right in blue, yes, in every poll but the two Atlas polls, Mamdani is up by double digits going back to October 10, so almost a month ago, right? A lot of polls, and in every poll, he was up by at least 10 over Cuomo, right? So if you win by 8.8, but your average victory is supposedly going to be around 15, 14.3, even factoring in those two Atlas polls, then does that really mean you underperformed? Well, you could certainly come to that conclusion. But here's the problem with that conclusion. When you actually look at who said they were going to vote for whom, Mamdani overperformed. Only two polls showed Mamdani at 50%. Those Atlas Intel polls had him at 41 and 44%. Fox 47, the most recent Fox 47, the Marist poll, which had him up 16, said he was at 48%. The Hill Emerson poll, where he was up by 25 over Cuomo, only had him at 50. He broke that. He was at 50.4%. So he did not underperform whatsoever. He overperformed. More people voted for Mamdani than said they would vote for Mamdani. Support for Mamdani coalesced. Democrats who may have been on the fence, independents who may have been on the fence, decided they wanted to vote for the Islamist, the anti-Israel candidate. They wanted to vote for the pro-Palestine candidate, the pro-peace candidate, the candidate who talked about a $4 billion. They decided, no, that's who we want to be our mayor. But the actual margin of victory was less because the anti-Zoran vote also coalesced. The Sid Rosenbergs, the right-wing extreme hater on WABC, which is the Katsimitis, a network, the right-wing hate radio network there in New York, Sid Rosenberg, Trump, and others, Ackman, to the extent he has some influence, I assume he has some, the rabbis, they persuaded a significant percentage of the Sliwa voters to vote for Cuomo. And so Mamdani's win over Cuomo was smaller than had been predicted because more voters ultimately decide to hold their nose and vote for Cuomo and not vote for Sliwa. But in the end, Mamdani overperformed. He got more votes. This was a big win for him. And I understand, yes, Adams had 70% and this and 64% and de Blasio had over 70%. You got to understand something. This is a very, very Democratic city. In those races where de Blasio won by, 2-1, 2.5-1, 3-1, same with Adams, they weren't facing challengers, well-funded challengers from the right and the center right, the way Mamdani was. They weren't facing another Democrat, right? I mean, Cuomo, I think, is a registered Democrat. He claims to be a Democrat. Cuomo was splitting the Democratic vote. And let's face it, Mamdani's a divisive figure because he is honest about Israel. He's a divisive figure because he's taking on the billionaire elites. The fact that he got over 50% is remarkable. We are seeing a sea change in the polity, in the voters. And this has got, if the Democrats don't act on this, if they don't seize this opportunity, then we truly can kiss what's left of our democracy goodbye. Just looking at the other races. So Spanberger, 15%, almost 50, 14.6% win over Winsome Earl Sears. She's a centrist. She's a moderate. She's not going to be any kind of a flamethrower or anything like a Mamdani. But there's something really important about that. And we'll talk about that in a moment. I'm glad Virginia went Democratic. I certainly am. And you can see here also the Attorney General. I said, 6 points. So a guy who hate tweets, who threatens violence against the Republican Speaker of the House, Republicans are so despised right now, so hated in Virginia, that guy wins by 6 points. It's kind of like all the outrage we saw. By the way, I think what Jay Jones did was wrong. I don't like it. I would have voted for him because I don't want to see a MAGA Attorney General in Virginia. But I don't like it. I don't think it's good politics. I don't think it's what we want, that kind of threats. But the fact that it went off, pretty much did go off a lot of voters' backs like water off a duck, reminds me a little bit of Luigi Mangione. I mean, that guy actually killed somebody, but he's a hero because there's so much anger, so much resentment, so much bitterness at the billionaire class. That somebody who takes on, and the guy he killed, what's his name? Brian, the United Healthcare exec, whatever his name was. He wasn't actually a billionaire, but he was, clearly a billionaire's tool. There's so much anger that Brian Thompson, people are totally, so many are okay with that violence, the violent rhetoric and stuff. If you don't like that, and I don't like it, you know what? If you want peace, you gotta fight for justice. You gotta fight for economic fairness. You gotta fight to end poverty. That's something, I couldn't believe it. That was something that actually Hakeem Jeffries did, I believe, say on CNN last night. I was trying to get that clip. I couldn't find it. It wasn't on CNN this morning. I'm not sure why. They'll probably put it up tonight. Jones up by 6, wins by 6 in Virginia. Pretty big win, pretty surprising win, if you ask me. I was not expecting that win by Jay Jones, but there it is. All right, let's look at New Jersey. Another big win for Democrats there. And this was maybe a little more surprising. The polls by, the Real Clear polling average and all that, where they put them all together. New York Times did this too. Shows you all the polls. They had Spanberger winning by 10 points. She won by like 14, 15, something like that. So, I mean, she won by more. She outperformed, but she was supposed to win big. It was supposed to be, if not a blowout, which it pretty much kind of was, a clear win. But New Jersey, I mentioned, close, super close. The Atlas poll, some other polls said, hey, Cheryl could lose, right? She's up by 1. She was up by 15, 20 points over the summer. Now she's up by like 2. What's that about? Cheryl wins by 13 points. Big win. That's very significant. That's an absolute repudiation of Donald Trump, who did endorse Chiarelli. Democrats have to seize this opportunity. They have to fight fire with fire. This was a question that was asked. And I kind of wish I had that. Hakeem Jeffries on CNN. Is it enough to campaign against Trump, or do you have to have policies? And Jeffries recoiled against it. He said, hey, did Spanberger, did Cheryl, did Mamdani, I believe he said, campaign on nothing? No, they had policies. Certainly, I didn't really follow Spanberger, and I think she certainly campaigned on women's right to choose. And I think there were some other policies that Spanberger talked about. And probably the same with Cheryl. Certainly, Mamdani had his laundry list of policies. So Jeffries was saying, yeah, we got to have some policies, and we will have them. So hopefully that'll take. Hopefully he is willing to stand up to his donors who don't want any policies. They don't want any, no policies. They don't want any policies. Because if you, and the reason they don't want policies is because for the Democrats to state policies, they have to be policies that are good for working people, or you won't get votes. You can't win as a Democrat if you enunciate bad policies, anti-populist policies. You can't win. So what you try to do is be Kamala and not say any policies and kind of giggle, be Hillary and just kind of, laugh and make fun of the other guy. That didn't work. That hasn't worked. You got to have policies. Even Biden, Obama campaigned as a populist, as a progressive in 2008 when he won the first time. All right. California. Is this the most important race? Do you think this was the most important race? 240-242-5646. Don't forget, click like, click subscribe. Let's keep those the channel growing. The redistricting blowout win. Nearly twice as many. Again, complete repudiation of Trumpism. This is the people of California, the most populous state, the big enchiladas. George H.W. Bush referred to California, the big enchilada, saying we're going to stack our congressional delegation with Democrats. We are going to respond to Texas, to Ohio, to Indiana by getting rid of some of our Republican Congress members and replace them with Democrats. If approved, this measure would change California's congressional district boundaries to make it easier for Dems to flip 5 seats held by Republicans. So there it is. That is a big loss for Trump. And I know his Justice Department was going to try to figure out, is there something going on there? Is there some funny business? I don't know. Good luck with that. Apparently, there were tweets during the New York race, the mayor's race, by Republicans, by Republican light, by corporate Dems, by corporate elites to warn voters, be careful when you vote, ICE might be there, kind of trying to scare people out of voting. Although, of course, if you vote and you're a citizen, you shouldn't have anything to fear from ICE, but of course you might. Apparently, ICE was not on the streets. ICE did not monitor, was not there. So there was just a lie. It was fear-mongering of the worst sort. Didn't work. Didn't work. 240-242-5646. So we're going to see redistricting in California, it looks like. Not a Gavin Newsom fan in any way, shape, or form, except I think he's doing the right thing here. And it's, again, not because I like redistricting, not because I like gerrymandered districts, but because otherwise we'd have an incredibly unrepresentative House of Representatives, where a few large Republican states stack their delegations with Republicans, even though the states are maybe 45, 55, 45 Democrat, 55 Republican. But you'll see 90% Republicans from their delegations. Virginia redistricting gambit. So it's not just California. Virginia redistricting gambit survives after Democrats dominate down ballot. So it looks like now Virginia will also redistrict. And they'll redistrict to make their congressional delegation more Democratic, more blue. And again, that's good because we don't want Trump. I mean, the trifecta is so awful. And it's not even a trifecta for Trump. It's like a quadrecta, or I don't know what it is when you get 4 in a row. Perfect, is that what they call a trifecta? And then there's others where you get 4 in a row, 5 in a row, whatever it is. It's so bad. And I say 4 because you got both houses and then Trump. So that's 3. That's a trifecta. And then you have the Supreme Court. So even though at this point, I think most Americans, we've seen it, the generic congressional ballot is Democratic. Most Americans don't want Republicans to control Congress. We don't. We simply don't. But they very well might. Hopefully, the redistricting efforts by California, we'll see same in Virginia and others, will be sufficient to prevent Republicans from keeping Congress against the will of the American people. They'll still have an advantage. Looks like they're still going to be able to take an extra 1 or 2 more seats than they should necessarily have. But if you look at this from the New York Times here, you see the 8 or 9 possible change when you do the districts that have already been redrawn. Texas, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio. Indiana could add another 1 or 2, but then New York, Virginia, and California will, to a significant degree, rebalance those scales. If Maryland might go through, my son said that Wes Moore seems committed to drawing out the one Republican from Congress who's there now, redrawing his district. That happens. I'm not going to cry any tears. I'm going to shed any tears. All right, 240-242-5646. Before we go, we did mention yesterday with Arlen, and by the way, it was a good show with Arlen. Hope you liked it. Kamala Harris, and also, I think we talked a little bit about Kamala, maybe not. Because the Cheneys, Arlen seemed to think that Cheney got a little bit of grace, or there was a little bit of rehabilitation for the war criminal because he supported Kamala, not Trump. And to me, the fact that Dick Cheney voted for you tells you a lot more about you than it does about, we already know how bad Dick Cheney is. The fact that he supported Kamala just tells you that she is really bad too. I'm saddened. In fact, I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't support Trump. I wouldn't vote for Trump. But it's a small data point in Trump's favor that Cheney didn't vote for him. I mean, that's how bad Cheney is, that if he doesn't vote for Trump, it's kind of a small argument for Trump, I suppose. It's like the Bill Ackman thing, right? Bill Ackman supports Cuomo. That's a very good reason to vote for Mamdani, or frankly, Sliwa. I mean, the fact that Bill Ackman is telling everyone don't vote for Curtis Sliwa, to me, is an argument in favor of Sliwa. Now, I would have voted for Mamdani, and by the way, I helped Mamdani. I campaigned. I did canvass for him for 4 days. I did. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very pleased about that. I would have felt guilty if Mamdani hadn't won, because I had signed up to canvass this past weekend. I didn't go because I was feeling sick and we have the new dog, and it would have been really a hardship for my wife and she didn't want me to go. So I didn't go, but also because I was sick, but mostly because of what she wanted. I would have felt guilty for not doing my duty as I saw it, which is to help Mamdani. But fortunately, he didn't need my help. And that was factored in, by the way. I figured he wouldn't need my help. If it had been super close, I probably still wouldn't have gone, mainly because I was sick. But I don't know what I would have done. Kamala Harris. I am saddened, so sad, to learn of the passing of former Vice President Dick Cheney. Vice President Cheney was a devoted public servant. His passing marks the loss of a figure who, with a strong sense of dedication, gave so much of his life. He gave like none of his life to the country he loved. He did it all for himself. He did it all to enrich himself, empower himself. He was tasked with finding a vice president for W. He picked himself. I love what Mira wrote. Sorry for the loss, Kamala. This must be really a hard day for you and the wider war criminal community. So great comment. I love that. I had to share that. I thought that was hilarious. But I just also wanted to respond to this argument that he's a public servant. You are a public servant. You are a dedicated patriot if you sacrificed for your country. If you give something up, if you forego your share, or you take a much smaller slice of the pie in return for your country, you put your life on the line. You volunteer during a war. Or you, at a minimum, don't seek deferments from, being drafted. Or if you are a draft dodger, then you fight it. You, like Muhammad Ali, say, this is wrong. I'm not going to serve. I'm going to go public in my opposition to this war. That's why I'm not going to fight it. That's being a patriot. That's being a servant of the public. Dick Cheney just got deferment. He had better things to do, which was to get rich. And as Tom Turnipseed had to use that name, throw that, it says in Common Dreams, he's a war profiteer, the personification of a war profiteer. He slid through the revolving door connecting public and private sectors of defense on 2 occasions that was for the purpose of enriching himself, of aggrandizing himself. Sorry, Kamala, I understand. I guess the loss was painful for you and the wider war criminal community. He was no public servant. The fact that you put that out there, it tells you so much about her, how tone deaf she is. She doesn't understand. She completely is, she will not understand why people think that was a bad tweet. She will not understand that. I think Dick Cheney would understand why people wouldn't like it. I don't think she would understand that. And as Turnipseed points out, Halburn more closely, right, that was the company he was CEO of, I believe. I believe he was the CEO of Halburn. More closely associated with the invasion of Iraq. Now, why would people find Kamala's tweets so offensive? I mean, he's an old man. He wasn't doing any harm. Yeah, you're speaking well of the dead and is a bad guy. Remember, the Harris-Biden administration was also a war profiteer's dream come true. Their 3 top defense cabinet ministers were all very closely tied to the for-profit defense industry. Lloyd Austin was on the board of, I can't remember which company. He was the defense secretary. The Secretary of State, Blinken, was a Boeing, he counted as one of his clients of his advisory firm and other defense contractors as well. And Avril Haines, the National Intelligence Director, she had what is now Tulsi's job. She was closely associated with Palantir. She'd worked at Palantir, spy company. So the idea that those 3 who were clear war profiteers were part of the Biden administration, incredibly upsetting. It's an example of our not living in a democracy, right? Because the decision whether to go to war is being made by people who are profiting from that war. Regardless of how many people are killed, regardless of how much money we spend, regardless of how destructive and harmful it is for our national interest. Kamala totally doesn't get that. Remember Hillary, there was some point where when she gave those speeches, right, to Goldman Sachs, and she was asked, well, why did you give the speeches? Well, they paid me. She had zero understanding why the American public would be offended and upset and look, suspiciously at her for taking money from an enormous Wall Street bank while claiming she was on the people's side. She didn't grok the conflict of interest there, that the Wall Street bank's interests are very, very different than those of the American public, that they're often diametrically opposed to each other, whether it's support for consolidation of powerful businesses so that they're one enormous monopoly, which serves Goldman Sachs because they represent companies that want to merge, but it's bad for the American public. Whether it's slashing top marginal tax rates, which is good for Goldman Sachs because they're incredibly profitable, but bad for the American people because there's less money for everyone else to pay for necessary services, and also increases the wealth and power and influence of a tiny minority that's acts contrary to our interests. Hillary didn't understand that. She really, really, really didn't understand why people were upset about her speeches to Goldman Sachs. And I think that's exactly how Kamala is. Why would people have a problem with my supporting the Cheneys? They voted for me. They supported me. Liz was my bestie for a while. Why would people have a problem with me embracing torture Dick? She really doesn't get it. A guy whose net worth or whose holdings went up according to Common Dreams and Senator Lautenberg went up 3,281% because of the war in Iraq, which he promoted. He was the architect of that war. Kamala doesn't get it. She doesn't get why that would upset people. That's why she was a terrible, terrible choice for vice president, but also president. That's why she was anointed to be president, because the corporations knew. The funders knew, the donors to the Democrat Party understood. She didn't even get how they acted so contrary to the best interests of the American public. We can only hope that there are contested primaries in 2028 and the Democratic primary voters make a much better choice than they did in 2016, than they did in 2020, and that the choice not only campaigns as a progressive, but actually is a legit progressive, as we hope Zorn is. But again, you don't have to buy the Democratic line. There's always going to be a Green Party, and that's whom I'm almost certainly going to vote for. All right, before we go, the idea that the Democrats are somehow superior. Let's listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene. I was amazed. Arlen apparently has sort of come around on Marjorie Taylor Greene, which I'm pleased, and I'm not like I've totally come around, but she's gotten to be one of the more the more decent people in Congress from either party. So let's play what she has to say here.
The worst thing that I just can't get over is we're not working right now. And I put that criticism directly on the Speaker of the House. And
so I want to stop it right there. She's criticizing her boss. Well, is he her boss? He's not really her boss. Her boss, the American people of her district who elected her. But he's her speaker. She's saying, hey, he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. He's supposed to get us back to work. He's supposed to end this ridiculous shutdown. And she's not saying it's the Democrats' fault. It's amazing. You want to know what's patriotic? When you make a sacrifice for a country. She's doing that. She's taken on her own party leader. That takes real guts.
Risen and risen and risen and risen. But I'm going to pick on Republicans. Republicans never fixed it. I yelled at Mike Johnson last week on our GOP conference call. By the way, I'm missing the call today. It's going on right now. And I hope that Mike Johnson is finally giving a single health care policy.
Mm-hmm. So she's saying there's a problem with health care. Americans are facing ever higher health care prices. That's not right. She knows that. She knows that's what her constituents are telling her. She's acting in their behalf. She's doing the right thing. She's being a good congresswoman for her district. How many Democrats can you say that about?
The country deserves it. I think that all of us right here are doing a great job of exchanging our ideas and things that we believe in, and we're doing it in a very professional and kind way.
Right. So I think Marjorie Taylor Greene deserves a lot of credit for that. I think she demonstrated right there that she's somebody that Democrats can and should work with. That if they want to end this shutdown in a way that benefits the American public, right? Because right now, Americans are hurting. People aren't getting SNAP who need it. Trump is weaponizing essential payments to poor, struggling, working people. This is an opportunity to reach across the aisle, not just to Marjorie Taylor Greene, but to even her supporters. Say, hey, we want to work with you. We really appreciate what you had to say. What can we do together to end this? And end it in a way that benefits the American public. Is that what AOC does? Is that how she responds? Or is she petulant? Is she immature? Does she try to settle scores? Let's find out. So let me just stop it right. So this is her tweet. This is the tweet. And Brian Allen says, AOC, quote, here's some tea. So she's going to spill the tea. She's going to tell you something like, a little bit of insider information that you might not know. Trump shut down Marjorie Taylor Greene. So she's going to spill tea. She's not going to work with Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's not going to try to make things better for her constituents. She's just going to go after somebody who just demonstrated a willingness to reach across the aisle and criticize her own leadership.
Some tea for you. MTG, people are like, oh my God, she's saying all of these things. Like, what's gotten into her lately? Oh, like she's bucking against Trump. She's bucking against the administration. Marjorie Taylor Greene wanted to run for Senate in Georgia. She wanted to run for Senate earlier this year in the state of Georgia.
All right, so let me just stop it. She is bucking her party. She is saying things that Trump doesn't like. Trump is upset with her. She's been very critical of his Israel policy. Now, there may be, a backstory. Maybe there's some personal vendetta going on as AOC is presenting, is arguing. So friggin' what? Taylor Greene is saying the right things. She's doing the right thing. Even if her motives aren't pure. Whose are? Who cares? Join with her, AOC.
Be the Republican nominee for Senate. So she was gearing up for that statewide race, and Trump told her no. Trump said no. And the White House and Trump land shut down Marjorie Taylor Greene's personal ambitions to run for Senate. And she has been on a revenge tour ever since.
Okay, so let's say that's true. So what? She's doing the right thing. She's saying the right things. You know what, you know what's funny about that? AOC was shut down repeatedly by Democratic leadership. Nancy Pelosi, not even a leader of the party anymore, made a few calls, and she got a dead man put in charge of the Democratic delegation in the House Oversight Committee, right? They put Jerry Connolly, who's now dead, and he was dying at the time. They promoted him over AOC. Not a peep from AOC. What's her response? You know what? I want primary Democrats. I won't support primaries to Democrats. What is it? Why would anyone think she's a good leader, a good progressive? She's a grandstander. She's a self-aggrandizer. And she also is a shill for the leaders of that party, the Democratic Party, who are clearly not on your side. I'll tell you what, I take Marjorie Taylor Greene every day. I don't agree with her on a lot of issues, for sure. She's been better on Israel than AOC. She calls it a genocide much more frequently than AOC, who only did it once when she was kind of forced into it. She takes on her own corrupt leaders. AOC sure as heck doesn't. Now, I would take MTG over AOC at this point pretty much every day of the week. And that's not because I think MTG is so great, although I don't think she's so bad, but it really tells you an awful lot about just how, sort of phony and hypocritical and dishonest AOC is. She is really a problem. All right, that's going to do it for Halitics today. I will return tomorrow. Sorry you didn't call. Would have loved to talk to you today, but you'll always have a chance tomorrow. You'll have a chance every time I'm live broadcasting on Halitics. And that will be as soon as tomorrow, noon East Coast time.